Good morning, students. Welcome to April 27th, Life of Christ. Hopefully, everybody's week is going well. Today, we're going to conclude Unit 5 of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem and his teachings. We'll be looking at chapter 17 through 19. In order to do so, the following objectives are right here. We're going to read, Luke 7:20 through 37, 18:31 through 34, and 19:1 through 10. Then we'll define the term Son of Man and answer why Jesus keeps referring to himself as such, as this seems to be a theme throughout the book of Luke, but we're going to explore that today. This is going to help us by watching, we'll watch Son of Man Bible Project, and this should help us understand a little bit better what this term means. So please, if you have not watched that, pause this here and then watch that video and come back to this, because it will help make the lesson go along smoothly and give you a better understanding of this term. Then we'll talk about Jesus' teaching on the coming kingdom. We'll talk about that, and then we'll conclude with defining the purpose of the Son of Man. And we'll do so by answering the question: why is the title of Son of Man important to humanity and a disciple of Jesus Christ? And you'll do that in a short short response, 2 paragraphs, and we'll explain that at the end more in detail. So that will be your assignment for the day. Memory verse this week is Luke 19 9 through 10, and that's due Friday. And then your parable project is due on May the 8th. So you got about a week or so or 2 weeks to get that done. All right, here are the verses that we're going to read. And so what I'll do is, as I've done before, I'll put the verse on the slide, and then you read the verse, and then we'll discuss what's going on in that particular part. So, Son of Man. First, before though, we need to understand who the Son of Man is, or where it comes from. It is derived from Daniel's dream. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this dream of 4 beasts that rise from the earth. They're horrific-looking beasts, mixed with certain animals. There's a bear with tusks. There is a lion with wings. There's the 4th beast is a hideous beast that comes out of the ground that is unexplainable, basically, in Daniel's terms. He can't identify certain parts of the beast, but he knows it's horrific. Each one of these beasts represent a ruler that will rise throughout history. Some have already happened. There's been interpretations that one of these beasts is Alexander the Great, or was. Some would also say that some of these beasts could have been one of the beasts could have been a ruler of Rome, or Roman rulers, period. But we know that these beasts represent evil rulers that will pretty much try to destroy humanity. And so, along with this dream, though, Daniel has another vision of this figure coming out of the clouds, and he calls the Son of Man. And he says it's given everlasting power, dominion over the earth, and all the people on earth will praise him. And so, again, watch the Bible Project to get a better understanding of that background. But Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man in Luke about 25 times. It's second to Matthew's account of Jesus referring to himself as Son of Man, which is about 30. So this is one of Jesus' statements. Now, as I said this before, Jesus did not refer to himself as Son of God. Even though he is a Son of God, he does not refer to himself as Son of God, as we talked about in Heroes of the Faith, to sort of not throw the Jewish people off. The Son of God is a strong statement in saying, basically saying, I am he, follow me, and you must follow me. It's sort of a strong statement, while Son of Man is more subtle. And again, Jesus didn't want to force himself on anyone, but he wanted you to consider following him. It's all about faith. So this term, to answer this question, would be a very controversial statement to the Jews still, because any good Jewish person who read Scripture and knew of this passage from Daniel, Jesus is still calling himself the Messiah. But any well-studied one will understand that. If the Pharisees did, and so the Pharisees were kind of like, no, this is not the one. while the people of the Jews, he could say that too, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay." It was kind of more of a subtle statement in understanding him as the Messiah. It's kind of like Donald Trump is a leader, and so that the term leader, we can understand that him being a leader. That person is a leader, just like our mayor is a leader, or the governor's a leader. But to say Donald Trump is president is different, because that means he's not just a leader, he is the president. Now, Son of Man is similar term. Jesus is saying, "I'm the Son of Man." Son of Man. David referred to himself as a son of man or a son of men, because they are people who come from man. If that makes any sense, to make this clear. But Jesus is saying he is the Son of Man, as referred to in Daniel. So again, any good Jewish person who read scriptures and knew this passage from Daniel would see that he was basically saying, "I am the capital THE, the Son of Man." If that makes any sense. And this will be clarified more in that video on the Bible Project. But anyway, moving on. We see in Luke 17:20 through 37. I want you to read that first, and we're going to explore this particular idea of the coming kingdom. So read that now. All right. So the coming kingdom. Jesus is asked by his disciples when the coming kingdom will come. When is your kingdom coming, Lord? And a reliable question, we asked that question today too, like, God, when are you coming back? Things like that. And so the disciples, being who they were, asked this question, and Jesus answers it beautifully. He answered it, and so he answers the first way. He says, "When the day comes, you will long for the day of the Son of Man." In other words, you will long for me to be here, because those days will be so treacherous that you will long for me to come back. So before it comes back, it's going to be a time where you'll be yearning for me to come back. I believe he's predicting their persecution, and then also what we're going through now. What we're going through now as we will wait for the Lord to return, the church relations for the Lord to return. I think he was saying, "You'll long for me to be here." He says that before this to come, in verse 25, his death has to happen. So he predicts his death subtly. Even still, they don't catch it just yet, but he predicts it subtly. Then he goes on and he says, don't follow false predictions. He says, don't go here if they say, "Oh, look, he's right there," or "Look, they're over here," or the kingdom is right here. He says, you'll be able to see, you'll know when it is time for the return. He says, and this is how it's going to happen. He said, his return will happen as it is in the days of Noah. Now, if you think about Noah was not a happy story, as we see in Sunday school pictures with animals on the boat and Noah smiling 2 by 2. No, it wasn't happy. It was a tragic event that destroyed the world and took out all the population except for Noah's family. And so he says, before all this, though, everybody except for Noah's family was celebrating, eating, drinking, and being merry, forgetting about God, rejecting God and basically avoiding him. And so he says, when the kingdom of God comes, it will be like those days where man's heart has turned completely away. Most men's hearts have turned completely away. Only a few will be completely, faithful. Then he says it will be as the days of Sodom. And so again, another tragic story for humanity. Sodom was destroyed by fire and brimstone. So he's just saying man's hearts will be turned away to the point where God's wrath will have to happen. But then he mentions that there'll be a rapture where one will be taken and the other one will be left. Because he mentions 2 will be in bed and 1 will be taken. Two women will be grinding wheat and the other one will be taken. So there we go. So this idea of the rapture is here. And then he makes a statement, because the disciples ask him, where will this happen? He said, "Teacher, where will this happen?" And he makes this weird statement. And I'm not going to lie, it took me a while to understand what he was talking about. But he says, where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. And basically, all that really means is as I looked at a couple commentaries, he is saying this. He says, where the corpse is, that term means when judgment is ripe, things will surely come. That's what David Guzik said. So in other words, when things are at its worst, the judgment will come. Barclay says things would happen when necessary conditions are fulfilled. So when these things are fulfilled, when man's hearts have completely turned away, the majority of man's hearts completely turned away from God, they've heard God's word, they've received it, but they're so committed to themselves, and then when that's when these events will particularly happen. Now I don't understand what that 100%, because people could say that's happening right now. Others may say that hasn't gone on yet, but I believe it's going to be a great rebellion towards God, as it was in the days of Noah, for God to be like, okay, it's time to get my people, as he did with Noah and his family, and save them. And so lastly, Jesus is saying that he is the key component to the coming kingdom, that the Son of Man is the key component to the coming kingdom. So the kingdom can't come without Jesus. So that's verse 17, 20 through 37. All right, let's move on. All right, so Luke 18, 31 through 34, we have this verse. I want you to read that for me, and then we'll get started. Okay, so in this passage, Jesus predicts his death. And it's a very short passage, but Jesus is, they're going to Jerusalem, and he explains to his disciples that when they're there, while they're there, that he'll be given over to the Gentiles. He says, the Son of Man will be given over to the Gentiles. And he says, the Son of Man, while he's there, will be mocked, treated shamefully, spit upon, and disgraced. He'll be flogged, and he'll be killed, but he'll rise on the third day. And it's sort of kind of a random statement, because they're talking and walking, and all of a sudden Jesus says this thing, and not surprisingly, the disciples didn't get it. They did not understand him. They did not grasp what he was saying. They just thought he was talking about something random. So again, this term "Son of Man," as I said, is a subtle statement of Jesus saying, "I'm the Messiah." But if you weren't well versed into the scriptures, as the Pharisees were, and that's what the Pharisees didn't like Jesus, you wouldn't catch it. You wouldn't catch it. So it's a subtle statement of Jesus saying, "I'm the Messiah." And so here, he's predicting this death, and he's saying, only salvation can come to the world through me. Like the Son of Man has to die. He has to die, but he will be raised. He will be raised on the third day. There we go. And this is I believe the third prediction of Jesus' death. He said it several times throughout the book of Luke. We unfortunately we had to skip those to save time, but yeah, his prediction is right here in chapter 18, 31 to 34. All right, now lastly is this story. As we look at Jesus' term or understanding of Son of Man, we find this story, a familiar story that you probably read before. It's the story of Zacchaeus. So I want you to read Luke 9, 1 through 10. Okay, now we see Zacchaeus. Just a couple facts about Zacchaeus, what you found. Zacchaeus is a tax collector, Roman appointed. And so what that means is that he works for Rome. More than likely, the Jews did not like him because they thought he was a traitor because of this. Any Roman official who was a tax collector was known, as we talked about before, was known for stealing money, taking more than they need. And how did they do it? Probably through force, because I believe every tax collector was given a guard or two to go along and collect taxes. And so we see that that's how Zacchaeus got his money, or any tax collector, but especially Zacchaeus, because he's small. It says he's small in stature. Now, in the Greek, stature could be translated into height, being that Zacchaeus was kind of short, and the average height for a Jewish man back then was 5'8". So Zacchaeus is probably shorter than that. It can also mean status. It can also mean status. In other words, he was looked lowly upon by all the Jews because of his job, because of his job, as he was an outcast. He was a sinner. What's the word? Yeah, an outcast, because he basically worked for the enemy. In short, but Zacchaeus, it says Zacchaeus went to climb this tree so he wants to know Jesus. Again, this term gnosko, we talked about it a couple weeks. During school, when we were, I think it was last quarter. But this term gnosko means to know, or want a full knowledge of, almost in an intimate level. He wanted to know Jesus on that level. Like, I want to know him personally, not just know of him, but I want to know him. So he couldn't see past the crowd first because of his height, and I believe the crowd would let him through. They probably saw him trying to get through and probably trying to push him and nudge him away. And so Zacchaeus had and honestly, let me pause for a second. Just like I said, Zacchaeus had armed guards that could follow him, but we see that there's no mention of those armed guards here in this passage. So first he humbled himself to relieve of his position and not use the guards to get through the crowd, and then he climbs a sycamore tree, which is a very difficult tree to climb. It's thick and prickly. He climbs it, which is a little bit humiliating for a person of his status, being rich and being a government official, and to climb this tree and embarrass him. But he doesn't care because he wants to know Jesus. Now this will preach. I may preach on this one day, but he wants to know Jesus on that level. And so he gave up all he had because Jesus sees him, as the verse says, and Zacchaeus gets down and explains that he's given up all he's had, giving back to the poor what he has taken, and wants to give more if he's cheating anybody else. So this man's life has been changed because of his longing to hearing Jesus' teachings and his longing to know this man. Something Jesus said inspired him to change and transform his life. He wants to become a disciple of Christ. And so Jesus' response to the crowd, who was probably looking at him like, what are you doing talking to the sinner? Oh, by the way, forgot. Jesus tells Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house today to eat. Once again, Jesus want to get his grub on. He's going to Zacchaeus' house again. So to eat, to fellowship, to have time with him as anybody would do for a friend, to go and spend time with them. So Jesus says, hey, I'm coming to your house today. And again, I'm sure that the Jews were like, what are you doing? He's a sinner. You can heal people, Mr. Jesus. You can heal people, Jesus, and things like that. But this guy, you don't understand. Jesus says, yeah, I do. And I'm going to eat at his house. And then he affirms Zacchaeus' salvation by saying this to the crowd. Zacchaeus is listening. Says, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So again, Jesus again is referring to himself as the Son of Man. I'm sure people still scratching their heads like, well, who is this Son of Man he keeps talking about? It's me. It's me. I've come to save those who are lost. That's it. If you remember what we talked about last week, Jesus is looking for those whose hearts are searching for him. And sometimes they don't even know it, but they're searching. So, let's conclude. So in conclusion, the Son of Man means all three of these. Jesus is letting us know that the Son of Man dwells with us. As we see in chapter 17, he dwells with us. He is the element of the coming kingdom, but he's here on earth with us, and wants to dwell with us for eternity. In order to do so, though, he had to die, and he was risen for us. His death and resurrection was for us, so that we can die and resurrect with him. And we'll talk about that next week. And then lastly, he came to seek and save us. He came to seek us, and not just seek us and find us, but also save us from ourselves, so that we can do that as well. And that is the point of Jesus letting us know that he is the Son of Man. He is the second Adam, if you remember that from the beginning of this semester. He is the second Adam. The first Adam caused sin. The second Adam, first Adam caused sin and death. The second Adam causes salvation and life. So, Lastly, in response to this short but thorough lesson, why is the title of Son of Man important to humanity? How do you think we should respond to this as disciples of Jesus Christ? So I want you to answer this question in two paragraphs. First paragraph can be the first question. Second paragraph can be the second question. But I want each paragraph to be 5 to 7 sentences. And then you're going to turn it into Moodle, Luke 17 through 19 response. And then that will be your assignment for the day. So I'm glad this video is shorter, so you can spend about 10, 15 minutes writing this response. And that is it. On Wednesday, we will have a test over Unit 5. It is open note. I'll provide the question to you via Moodle on Wednesday. Should probably take you 30 to 45 minutes to complete. But other than that, you all have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening.